When you think of ancient Italy, one name just pops into your head, right? Rome. We think of the empire, the legions, the aqueducts. But what if I told you that for centuries, Rome was actually the underdog? That they were living in the shadow of a much older, more powerful civilization, a civilization that would become their greatest rival.
We have this idea that history was just a straight line, leading right to Roman dominance. But who was there first? Who were the original masters of Italy that Rome had to fight just to get on the map?
Well, the answer might actually surprise you. For a very, very long time, the real power in Italy wasn't Rome at all. It was a civilization you've probably heard of, but whose incredible story is often just a tiny footnote: the Etruscans.
So let's set the scene. After about 700 BCE, while Rome was still, just a growing city-state, the Etruscans were already a huge deal. They controlled a big chunk of central Italy. In fact, around 600 BCE, an Etruscan dynasty was actually ruling inside Rome itself. But as you can imagine, that arrangement was never going to last. At the end of the 6th century BCE, everything changed. There was this huge political shakeup. The Roman monarchy got thrown out and the Roman Republic was born. And that single event turned everything on its head. This wasn't about dominance anymore. It was about a direct and pretty bitter rivalry.
And in the first round of this new fight, the Etruscans came out on top big time. In response to this new republic, an Etruscan king named Lars Porsena just marches on Rome. And he wins. He actually captured the brand new Roman Republic, which just goes to show you how powerful the Etruscans still were.
But here's where the story gets really complicated. While the Etruscans were looking pretty dominant, the whole balance of power in Italy was about to get shaken up. See, it wasn't just a two-way battle between Rome and the Etruscans. A new, very powerful player was entering the game from the south, the Greek city-states of what they called Magna Graecia. And you can see the impact of this new player almost immediately. Remember how the Etruscan king Porsena took Rome all by himself? Well, when he later tried to attack another Latin city, Aricia, things went very differently. So why the change? Because this time, the Romans had backup. Greek forces teamed up with the Latins, and together they pushed the Etruscans back. This was really the first sign that Etruscan dominance was starting to crack. What came next was an entire century of just brutal back-and-forth war, mainly between Rome and the major Etruscan city of Veii. It all kicked off in 483 BCE. Then, in 477 BCE, the Etruscans scored a huge victory at the Battle of the Cremera. They literally wiped out an entire Roman noble family. I mean, it was a massacre. But slowly, the tide started to turn. And by 396 BCE, Rome got its revenge with a crushing victory, conquering Veii. This was a long, bloody fight for survival. So you have to ask, why did things turn so dramatically against the Etruscans? Well, it's because they weren't just fighting Rome. They found themselves stuck in an absolute strategic nightmare, getting attacked from all sides at the same time. Okay, first you've got trouble from the north. Celtic tribes, the Romans usually called them Gauls, started pushing down into Italy. They began grabbing northern Etruscan lands, putting a ton of pressure on their heartland. Then if you look to their west, out on the Tyrrhenian Sea, the Greeks were taking over. After a few key naval battles, they pretty much gained control of the seas, which cut off vital Etruscan trade routes, so their money and supplies started to dry up. And of course, you can't forget the ever-growing threat from the south. By this point, Rome wasn't just a single city anymore. It had conquered and united the other Latin cities, creating a much bigger, much more organized, and frankly, much scarier military machine. So, let's just put all that together. Imagine you're the Etruscans. You've got Celtic tribes pouring in from the north, you've got Greek fleets blockading you from the west, and you have the relentless Roman Republic pushing up from the south. They were being squeezed from every single direction. It was an impossible situation. So, with the Etruscans weakened, fighting for their lives on 3 different fronts, a newly powerful Rome was in the perfect spot to deliver the final blows. And just think about how fast everything flipped. In 477 BCE, the Etruscans were celebrating that massive victory over Rome. Less than 100 years later, in 396 BCE, the Romans conquered Veii, one of Etruria's most important cities. It was just a complete and totally stunning reversal of fortunes. Facing complete destruction, the Etruscans made one last, desperate move. They put aside all their old rivalries and formed a huge alliance with other Italian peoples, hoping that maybe, just maybe, their combined strength could finally stop the Roman war machine.
And the scale of that final showdown, the Battle of Satinum in 295 BCE, was just immense. On one side, you had the Roman Republic, and on the other, a massive coalition, the Etruscans, the Samnites, the Umbrians, and even the Gauls. It was basically Rome against almost everybody else.
And yet, Rome won. The Grand Alliance was completely shattered. Over the next 15 years, the last Etruscan cities fell, one by one. By 280 BCE, it was all over. The centuries-long war had ended, and the Etruscans were finished as an independent power.
It really makes you realize Rome's rise to power was never guaranteed. It was the result of a long, brutal struggle. The Etruscans were a great power that just got caught in a perfect storm. And that leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to think about. If not for all that pressure from the Greeks and the Celts, could an Etruscan empire, and not a Roman one, have been the great power that defined the ancient world?